Ave Legion and welcome to my channel. My name is Ludi and today we're gonna do our amazing trade guide for all of you stock enthusiasts. In this video we'll be going over the trade nodes and trade power, trade value and merchants, trade companies, as well as when to collect and when to transfer, and which trade nodes are the strongest at the very start. If we get 5,000 likes in this video, I'm gonna do a proper top 10 best trade nodes in EU4. Trade in EU4 is represented via the various trade nodes on the map as you see right now. There's actually two types of trade nodes, namely the Chad end trade node, of which we have the English Channel node, the Genoa and the Venice trade nodes, and the non-end trade node or the Virgin node, such as everybody else in the world. Boo-hoo. So what is the main difference between these types of trade nodes? Well, essentially, as you can see on the map, in the end trade nodes, none of these arrows are pointing outwards, which means that none of the trade winds, as they are called, are moving away from the trade node. What does that matter, Ludi? Well, it matters because that means all the trade value in this node stays in this node, plus you're getting more trade value from the adjacent nodes into here. Meanwhile, in a non-end trade node, such as Constantinople here, you have the local trade value, which is basically the amount of money that you get from the province's production, as well as the incoming value, which is from the adjacent nodes, namely Crimea, Aleppo, and Alexandria. Because it's not an end trade node, it also has outgoing value 0.93 ducats and 1444 into the Ragusan trade node. The non-end trade nodes, some of them are good, such as the Lubeck node. The Rhineland node is actually quite decent, Constantinople one, and a few others, and there's some that are absolutely trash. For example, the Cuyaba trade node here has 2 outgoing and 0 incoming trade winds. That means everything is leaving this trade node with very little staying here based on the trade power of the nations collecting in this node. Speaking of trade power, what is trade power and how can we get it, Ludi? Trade power is essentially the amount of control that you have in each trade node. As England, for example, we start off with 51% of the English Channel node, which means that we control 51% of whatever happens with this money here. Because it's an end trade node, you only can collect here. You cannot transfer anywhere else, so your only option is going to be collecting in this node. Because it's our home trade node, which means our main trade city, which is in London at the very start, is within the English Channel provinces. If we, for example, change the main trade city to Northumberland, which is in the Northern Sea node, then we would have our main trade node changed also, and we would have to assign a merchant to collect from here. Speaking of, you always want to have your main trade city in the strongest trade node available to you. In this case is the English Channel node. If, for example, you're playing as Brandenburg, that would be the Lubeck trade node, so you want to change to Stralsund or Stettin once you get these cities your main trade city. So how can we get more trade power, Ludi? One easy way of getting more trade power and fast way is by assigning light ships to protect in the targeted trade node. If you can build a flagship, then you can also make a light ship flagship and make it so that it gives you 1 more trade power per ship in fleet. This way, you get even more trade power from all of your light ships collecting in that node. The easiest way, however, to get more trade power is by building the right buildings. The first available trade power building is the marketplace, followed by trade depot and the stock exchange, each of which increases the amount of trade power that you get from the particular province you're building it in. London has 42 trade power. By building this, we increase this by 50%, bringing it to 60 trade power. One more easy way of increasing this is to assign the Protect Trade Edict in the state, which increases the trade power in all of the provinces of the state, but most of the provinces do not have much trade power, as normally only the trade centers and specific provinces have higher trade power than the rest. If you have the cash for it, you can also upgrade your centers of trade to a level 2 or a level 3 center of trade, which in return will increase your trade power even more. There you go. By upgrading this to level 2, we went up to 21%. If we set the protect trade edict, that's going to bring us up to about 27%. And to get it to level 3, we need to have actually 25 development in here. So I boosted this to 26. There you go. We're bringing it to a level 3 center of trade on pause, and we went up to 67 trade power. Why did it go up so much? Well, that is because you also have to take into account the trade power modifier from protect trade, as it scales with the amount of flat trade power that the world port gives you. It also gives minus 10 dev cost for all provinces in this state, possible number of buildings as well +1, and increase the amount of sailors that you can have, together with decrease the naval tradition decay. Remember that you can only have as many level 3 centers of trade as you have merchants. So we know what trade power is, but how do we get more trade value in these nodes? Trade value means the amount of money that you can have from particular trade nodes, and as you can see, this one just went up to 18.7. Why is that? It's because it always recycles on the first of every given month, and the more trade value you have, the more money you're actually going to make from trade. We're making 15 ducats from trade alone because the English channel nodes trade value went up. That is because I devved up this one province here. It is 17 production development. Now, production in EU4 is directly related to the amount of trade money that you can have, which is why the economic meta in EU4 is actually increasing your production development and manpower, as well as reducing your tax development. Why is that? Once more, it is literally because every time you increase this production development, you actually increase the amount of goods that you produce in a province. 5 production means 1 trade good produced. 1 trade good produced, depending on the trade good, it gives you a flat amount of ducats. So because we're producing naval supplies here, which is 2 ducats, we actually are producing 2 ducats worth of goods in Gloucester, and that is going to go towards the overall trade value of the English channel. This is also important to realize that when you build manufactories, they give you local goods produced +1, which essentially is the equivalent of deving this up 5 times in your production. Your trade value is directly taken from the goods produced. More goods produced gives you more trade value. As you can see here, we're at 5.94. We're going to go up to 6.60 by increasing our production development, and we can go as much as we want up. There you go, 9 trade value from one province alone, simply by increasing the trade production. This also increased our trade power, by the way. We have to unpause for that, but there you go, 58.9. Trade value, however, does not mean that you're gonna have all of that sweet trade value for yourself. So I've taken as an example the nation of Tidor, which is producing cloves, and I've devved it up a little bit, which means that we're now doing 33.86 in trade value here. However, because we are only 8% trade in the Moluccas, which is the trade node that we are a part of, we actually are only getting 1.08 ducats from the insanely high trade value that we are producing. So essentially, the nation that is getting the highest amount of trade power in this node, in this situation, that being Makassar, are profiting from us developing this province more than we are profiting from us developing the province from a trade perspective. That is simply the trade perspective, not the production perspective, because we still are getting production income from developing this, even though we don't have the trade hegemony over this trade node. If, for example, Makassar had 100% of this trade node and all of the trade provinces here, then Makassar would equally be getting insanely high production and trade income from these provinces. It is important to note this, as for example, when you're playing as a republic, namely, let's say the Hanseatic League here, because they have a massive amount of trade power in the Lubeck trade node, despite the fact that they're only producing 2.80 trade value, that's like nothing, they are getting an insane 3 ducats at the very beginning from this trade node. So essentially, goods produced by other provinces in the Lubeck trade node increase the economy of Lubeck. Remember though, it is easy to get trade power, you just need to focus on the right provinces. In fact, I don't recommend that you build the marketplaces everywhere. As you can see here, you just need to build the marketplaces place in the highest trade value provinces. Lincolnshire, London, Bordeaux, and a couple more here should be fine. Probably one of the most important aspects of trade in EU4 is merchants. By default, you get 2 merchants as a regular country, but then you can get more merchants based on your government reforms. The easiest way to get merchants, however, is the trade ideas, which give you 1, 2, and 3 merchants after you've filled in the entire trade ideas. Other ways of getting trade merchants is forming trade companies. How do you do this? You click on a province, make sure it's not a state, make sure it's also not a part of your subcontinent. So for example, my capital is here, which is a part of the Western Europe subcontinent. That means that everywhere else outside of the Western Europe subcontinent, I can make trade companies. I can make trade companies in Eastern Europe, Levant, Maghreb, and everywhere else. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on this here, assign to trade company. This is going to form a trade company. It's up to you what provinces you want to add to your trade company. Do take note, once you do add a province to a trade company, you cannot convert it to your religion anymore, as it gives you a minus 200 missionary strength from belonging to a trade company. So convert it to your religion before you add it to a trade company. Once we get above 51% of the local trade power in that trade node, we get a bonus merchant. Another way of getting merchants is also getting colonial nations. Once your colonial nations have 10 provinces, they also get 1 bonus merchant. But honestly, with the trade companies, it's so easy, it's insane. A really fast way of adding all of your provinces to a trade company is going to this screen, clicking assign provinces to trade company. This will assign all the provinces that you have in this trade node to said trade company. We're going to do the same with both of these, and we're going to on pause for 1 month. Remember that it takes 1 month to update everything trade related here, so be patient. We managed to get 50% and above in the Anatolian part, so we have 8 merchants. What are we going to do with them? Well, this is the oldest question in the book. Do we transfer or do we collect trade? Of course, guys, with your merchants, you can either collect or transfer trade. Transferring trade essentially diverts the trade from a trade node into another trade node, and it is important to note that it diverts based on the amount of trade power that you have. So because we have trade power in the Constantinople trade node at 84%, we can transfer a lot of this into the Ragusan trade node. Essentially, we're transferring 6.09. But as you saw before, because by default we are already transferring 6 point something, we don't even need to have a merchant here to have it transferred there. We can get a merchant here to have it collected from here if we want to, and that means we're getting 6.9 multiplied by our trade efficiency, which is 44%. So we are getting 8 ducats from collecting in the Constantinople trade node. Collecting there means we starve out the Ragusan trade node, which in return was spilling into the Venetian trade node. So is it worth transferring all the way from Constantinople into the Venetian trade node, despite the fact that we're only getting 53% in the Venice trade node? That is a very difficult question to answer. I would recommend that you test out in most situations whether it is worth it or not to transfer, or if it's better to just collect. As a standard rule myself, I like to always transfer in my trade node if I have above 50% in my main trade node. So because I have 53% in Venice, it is actually worth transferring from all adjacent nodes into Venice. However, if it was, for example, 20% or 30%, I would have just collected everywhere else, as collecting means I still get a percentage of the trade value in these nodes, and as such I get a percentage of money from these nodes, which would have otherwise been transferred in this node and which would have been divided once more amongst everybody that is collecting in this node. So I've set all of my merchants now to be transferring trade alongside here all the way into Venice, which means that now it went up to 24 ducats trade value. That means that I'm personally getting 19 ducats of that because of my trade efficiency and because I only have 50% of the trade node. We're going to increase this quickly by assigning the protect trade edicts in the provinces here, bringing us up to 59%, and which increased it by ducats. That is a massive increase for just 8% more trade value. There is one exception to this rule. If you have a very big nation, you want to have more than one main trade nodes. How do you do that? You obviously have your main trade city node, which in this case is in Venice, but for example, we could also have another one in Novgorod or another one in Lubeck or the English Channel, depending on how big our nation is, and we can be collecting in all three of these main nodes at the same time. Next, let's talk about trade companies a little bit. So as you saw, I've assigned all of these to companies. What does this do? One bad thing that this does is that you get 90% autonomy. That means we get 90% less tax, 90% less manpower, sailors, force limit, and 45% less production efficiency. We do get some special building, namely the trade company investments. There are 5 of these, and the first one essentially gives you some defensiveness, which is upgraded to double with the second building, and even some supply limit modifier, as well as a land force limit for your entire country as the level 3 upgrade. Keep in mind, you can only have one level 3 upgrade for each state. That means in the state of Trace, I can only have one level 3 officer's mess or whatever I choose to go for. I'm gonna go for the officer's mess, and as you can see, all of these are grayed out. You cannot go for them anymore. The other ones are increased trade power by a flat 4 with the second upgrade, as well as a local production efficiency for the entirety of the Trace area. And for the level 3, we get naval force limit plus 5. Local venture gives us more production efficiency and local goods produced, as well as trade steering. Having the trade steering is actually extremely important and can be quite exploited. If you have a few trade companies in the Alexandria or Aleppo trade node, for example, when you do assign one of these trade steering places here, it's going to give a massive boost to the amount of trade that you can actually steer out of this node into whatever node you want to steer it in. You also can get yearly army tradition, although this really is not much of a big boost because it's very little army tradition and tax modifier, as well as local manpower and sailors, and even marine force limit for your entire nation. Take note that this building actually negates the fact that you get minus 90%, so you're essentially paying almost no governing cost for trade companies, whilst at the same time you can get the full amount of manpower by getting the military administration. Similarly, you get full amount of production and half of the tax by building the other buildings in here. As a republic especially, it is really important that you have trade companies, and the more you have, the better it is for you, especially since it helps deal with the amount of governing capacity issues that you likely will have. One more important thing to note about trade nodes is that they can come in handy whenever you're doing things in the early game. You do have some policies that you can assign these trade nodes. For example, increased trade node power, spy network construction, which is actually extremely efficient early on since it helps you get claims or spy networks faster than you would otherwise be getting them. You also can get siege ability and artillery bonus versus force +1, increase your improved relations ability by 15%, or if you're a Muslim power, you can also get the propagate religion that essentially will convert provinces to your religion as long as you have above 40% of the trade power in that particular node, and you need to have a merchant there as well. One very important thing you need to take away from this guide is the fact that you should always try to get one main trade node where you get above 50 trade power and adjacent trade nodes from which you transfer your trade into the main trade node. If you cannot get a proper main trade node, then you can just collect everywhere, since honestly not every trade node in the world is worth it. I am going to give you a fair list of trade nodes which are great as main trade nodes, but these are not the only ones, and even a bad trade node can be turned into a good one as long as you have really high mercantilism that increases your provincial trade power as well as the embargo efficiency, and as long as you have the majority of the trade power in that trade node. Of course, the Genoa, Venice, and the English Channel are the best starting trade nodes, but as you move along in the years, Sevilla becomes one of the, if not the most powerful trade node in the game by filtering in all of the trade from the colonies, especially from the Caribbean, which is the richest trade node in the New World. That is also essential that whenever you colonize as Portugal or Castile, that you take all of the Caribbean node for yourself at the very start. Don't let the English or anybody else get in there. Speaking of the English, they also can transfer trade from the New World into their very own trade node through the Chesapeake Bay trade node, as well as via the North Sea, who also gets trade from the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So essentially, colonial wise, Portugal and Castile are going to be competing with the English on who gets the majority of the trade in which trade node. So definitely my first two choices for a proper trade node are Sevilla and the English Channel. Non-colonial trade nodes, obviously Genoa and Venice are going to keep their importance, but Lubeck becomes one of the strongest nodes in the mid-game from all of the Germanic areas filtering into here. Rhineland has a chance of stopping a lot of trade as well in. Novgorod as well, especially after you get the fur trade from the Siberian parts and Kazan, and even the Baltic Sea if Sweden or whoever owns that starts stealing some of the Novgorod node and filtering it into the Baltic Sea node. The Persian node is also insanely overpowered, and if you manage to cock on over the Europeans by bringing the Indian node via Hormuz and Basra into Persia, then you can essentially cut all the Asian trade from going into Western and Eastern Europe. The only other choice they have is via the North Siberian ways into Kazan and Novgorod. The Nippon trade node can be super powerful as well. If Japan went colonial, they get two essential trade wins that they can get from the New World. But the jewel of the Asian nodes is the Malacca trade node, which starts extremely strong, also has some of the strongest trade value provinces in the game. Once these get developed a little bit more in the late to mid game, the trade in the Malacca is insane. Not to mention, you have 4 other trade nodes incoming into your main trade node here, namely Canton, Siam, Hangzhou, and the Malaccas. You do have 2 outgoing into basically India and Africa that eventually will spill into Europe, that you can destroy by having 100% or between 90 to 100% of the trade power in Malacca, and thus preventing anything else from going outside of here. Pretty much all the Indian nodes are great, but the best ones are going to be the Coromandel and the Gujarat one, both of which have the option of stopping trade from going anywhere else into the west. In fact, guys, if you want me to do a top 10 strongest nodes and also illustrate how strong they can be, leave a like. If we get 5,000 likes on this video, I'm gonna do the top 10 trade nodes video. And I do hope this video was informative. I plan on doing more mechanic guides, so leave a comment below. Let me know what other type of mechanics you want me to talk about in EU4, and I'll be more than happy to do a video on those. So see you guys in the next one. I also want to give a very special thank you to all of my patrons and channel members, as well as my Twitch subscribers. Thank you so much, guys, for all the support. I wouldn't be able to make these videos without you.